going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. In case you're new here, my name is Tyson. I am a PhD candidate in chemistry at Yale and Berkeley, and I think we got some pretty cool content on this channel, so definitely make sure you check us out. Now, today we got a crazy special guest in the building. I actually found today's guest on another interview on YouTube, and I thought the conversation was so interesting that I had to reach out to him and see if he would be willing to come chat with us on the channel, and luckily for us, he agreed. What I'll do is I'll link that interview in the description below, but listen, don't leave my video to go watch someone else's, all right? So definitely make sure that you finish watching this first, and then you can go check that out. So Cordell, man, I think I know a little bit about you from the interview that I saw, but do you want to kind of give us a little bit of an introduction, a little bit on your background?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. First of all, thanks, Tice, for inviting me to the show. I really appreciate it. I just have to admit, like, to be honest with you, it's still like a new experience for me. People reaching out to me from the video I did with Dan.
Right.
It's kind of surreal, you know. It's not something I would ever expected. I think the video is nearly at 700,000 views right now.
Yeah.
So it's kind of crazy to just kind of be in the momentum of something where people are interested in what I have to say. Generally, it's like I'm trapped in my notes, and you know, people ask me questions about stuff, and I'm just like, yeah, sure, whatever, and I go about my business. And now everyone's very interested to hear what I have to say about automation, technology, the future of the economy, and these sorts of things. So I really appreciate you inviting me here, and I'm glad to chat with you about whatever you've got on today's menu. So my name is Cordell Fantroy. I'm a PhD student at Chongqing University. I've been living in China for about 7 years now, since November 2013. I've been studying my PhD. This will be starting my third year if we weren't in the middle of the COVID crisis here. Prior to that, I lived in Europe for nearly 4 years. I studied my master's there. Mostly lived in Brussels while I was living in Europe. And prior to that, did my undergraduate in Siena College in upstate New York. And the first 2 years I spent at Immaculata University in Pennsylvania. I'm always glad to chat about different topics related to social science, economics. So I'm as I said before, glad to be here.
Yeah, man. Like I said, so I definitely appreciate you, coming out to chat with the little people. I know you're a superstar these days, so appreciate you taking the time. But all right, so there's a lot of stuff that I want to.
I don't wish that.
Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff I want to talk to you about, but I kind of want to get started with the basics. So as a Black academic myself, I'm always interested in the trajectory of Black academics, right? So kind of, how you got started, being so well-traveled, having such a fascination, kind of a cosmopolitan way of life, You want to tell us a little bit about how that all started?
Sure. So I'd like to say it all started when I was younger. There's a story that I always tell about when I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. I saw a picture of the Eiffel Tower, and it was really fascinating to me to see something like that. The picture just kind of caught my attention. And at the same time, I remember my mother telling me she'd studied French during her high school years. So it was always something that kind of, lingered in my mind. And throughout the years, I kind of became focused on putting myself in position to go to see the Eiffel Tower, to learn to speak French. And these seeds were planted when I was such a young kid that for me, perhaps it was just an idea, but it turned into reality. So I was able to go to Paris for the first time, I think in 2007. And the experience of studying throughout my middle school, high school, and the first 2 years of university, and then finally going there, it's something that in the moment I realized how it had originated. It took years for me to look back on that moment and kind of embrace the history of like how I got to where I'm at today. But the reality is it was something that I think I started when I was a kid. I've always been interested in reading science fiction and understanding the more complex problems that the world presents to us and trying to figure out ways to solve those problems with conventional means and sometimes by thinking outside the box.
Absolutely.
So as a Black academic, I would definitely say that, my parents have always told me and tried to instill in me to think about who I want to be and what I want to be, and then to make decisions on how to get there. And I constantly preach those same things: is what do I want to be and how do I get there? You have to make the right decisions on the path to becoming who you are, because I think it's internal, it's inside of you to know what it is that you're interested in. And as a kid, sometimes those things change, but along the way, you have to be constantly thinking about who you're going to be next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And I think I'm constantly living 10 years ahead of myself, thinking about the things that I'd like to be when I'm 40 years old now.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing. And so would you say, it sounds like that's the difference, right? Because I think a lot of us learn languages at some point when we were a kid, but for a lot of people, it doesn't manifest in the same way that it did for you. But it seems like that early kind of investment and encouragement and the future planning kind of led you actually realizing something based on that.
Yeah, for sure. I think, to be honest with you, I think it was a bit of an obsession. Cool. For me, I can give you a good story. I remember the first time I was in Paris, and I'd been an AB student for years, and this is a good life lesson that I learned. What you learn in a classroom doesn't automatically translate to the real world. So I was walking around, and I think I went into a shop to buy a sandwich or a croissant, something like this. And at the time, my French was absolutely terrible. Now in my mind, it wasn't, because I was an AB student. And I said something like, "Can I have one of these?" And the shopkeeper said something to me, something like, "Would you like one or two, or should I put it in a bag?" And in the moment, I'm just like, yes. Oui. And the person kept repeating the question. And in reality, I was answering a question that wasn't yes or no with yes. And someone next to me who spoke English and French told me what the shopkeeper was saying. And I felt really embarrassed. I was like, wow, I can't believe I studied French for, at the time, maybe 6 years or so. And it just didn't work. And I can laugh now. At the time, I was just ashamed of myself. Like, what have I been doing? Wasting my time. Like, I thought I spoke French. And of course, it was the speed of the language and, the cadence of the language from being in a place. And I've had similar experiences in every country I've been to. The same goes with learning Mandarin. And I just recall that moment. And when I returned home, I thought to myself, there's no way that's ever going to happen again. I need to make sure I put myself in a position that if I'm learning something, I need to make sure I learn it the right way. And also dedicate myself to the outcome that I want. And the outcome was become fluent in French. So I spent maybe 7-8 years after that just putting the work in. And it was something that I think built the foundation for me to do the same thing once I started learning Mandarin. It's just like the work, the time, those are the things that kind of drive me. It's not just the end goal. It's making sure you put the time and the work in to get from A to Z. And that kind of showed me where I wanted to go. And once I returned home, I spent, I want to say, hours. I stopped watching movies in English. All of the movies I watched, I had French subtitles. When I would drive to my parents' house and back up to the university, I only listened to French music. I would print out the lyrics to everything, and I would read the French lyrics. Once I got out of the car, to every song I'd listened to, and I just became obsessed with not perfection, but obsessed with doing it the right way. That at least if I'm putting in the effort to get to where I want to be, I'm on the right path. And that's kind of how I got to I got to French fluency. Then once I moved to Chongqing, I started studying Mandarin once I got there. Mandarin and a little bit of Chongqinghua.
So you knew no Mandarin when you originally left. You learned it during your program?
Yeah, I learned it once I got there. So I showed up there with zero Mandarin Chinese skills whatsoever. Wow,
that's crazy. Yeah, so walk us through. So from high school, what was kind of the motivation to go overseas for? So after college, I should say. So after undergrad, when you went to do the master's, like kind of what was involved in that decision, and ultimately going from Europe to China, what kind of motivated that as well?
Okay, I'll give you like the brief synopsis. So. From that moment I mentioned when I was around 7 years old, I'd always constantly had this idea in the back of my mind that I wanted to go somewhere. And mainly my mind was focused on getting to Paris, French. So my first 2 years of university, essentially what happened is I wanted to study abroad. And the university, Immaculata University has a program where they select a number of students every year to go abroad. And for me, I decided that I wanted to be in a program where I had my own choice. So I transferred from Immaculata to Siena College. And the first person I met, I still remember to this day, is Brother Brian at Siena College. He was the head of the study abroad department. And I sat down with him. He's the first person I met on campus. When I drove up to Albany, I made sure I had a meeting with him first. I sat down and we talked about it. And initially my plan was to go to Paris because I'd been there the year prior. And he kind of broke it down for me. He said, well, if you want to learn about the world, politics, and you study political science and international relations, you should consider Brussels. And he kind of planted the seed in my mind to think about Brussels. And mind you, at the time, all I've been thinking about was getting back to Paris. And, you know, that conversation we had, he gave me a list of different countries that were like the top destinations for a lot of students from America for studying abroad. And I went through the list. I looked at every single university. I looked at all the programs they had. And that exploration process was really interesting for me because, you know, in my mind, I have to admit, I had like a singular focus on just Paris. I hadn't looked outside of that. Sure. And it was a great thing because it gave me the opportunity to say, okay, well, Paris is right around the corner from Brussels. It's a train ride away. If I go there, it's probably a place I would not go to if I went to Paris. So why don't I just go to Brussels, and I can always travel from there to London by train, or to Paris by train, or even to Germany by train. And that's kind of what led to my decision to go overseas for my master's degree. Once I finished my, I want to say it was like the last month of my senior year at Siena, I had already started applying to master's programs overseas. And, you know, that's basically how I ended up back in Brussels, just kind of having these constant moments of learning new places and new things.
Cool, man. And then, so going from Brussels, ultimately to Chongqing.
Right. So there's a story I've told plenty of times as well about my experience in Brussels studying at the University of Kent. So the main campus is in Canterbury, England. And I decided to live at the Brussels campus because of my familiarity with it and because I wanted to maximize my French usage. During one of my seminars, there was a student who basically had a bit of an argument with one of my classmates about applying a realist lens to the Chinese society, the economy, and the culture. The student was from the mainland, and I don't recall which province he was from. But basically, his comments were that you can't talk about China if you've never been there, and you don't understand what you're saying. And he kind of had a bit of an argument with the lecturer, with our professor, and then he left the seminar. And, you know, at the moment in time, I was just kind of like, whoa, that was crazy. I've never seen anyone yell at a professor like that, first of all. And I didn't have anything to say. I was a bit speechless. Okay, well, none of us know what we're talking about China because none of us have been there, but that doesn't matter because we read about these things in books. And as I started to think about this idea, it reminds me of some experiences I've had. You learn in the classroom doesn't always apply to what you learn in the real world. So, you know, it kind of festered in the back of my mind for some time that, okay, that guy had a couple specific points about what we don't know and why he has a better understanding of them because he's from there, he's lived there, and he has an understanding that is from the real world, not just from a book, not some academic application. So once I graduated, I spent about a year and a half back in New York, and I have a really good friend from Fuzhou, which is on the east coast of China. Okay. And he constantly been telling me, man, you've been everywhere in the world, you have to go to China. You have to go. And it never really settled in my mind that I should go. But again, as I mentioned, this moment had been very important for me during my studies. So I decided, you know what, I should give it a shot. And I ended up spending, I want to say, a month in China before I realized, like, okay, I made the right decision. I went there without knowing any of the language, without having any contacts on the ground. And it was basically one of the most exciting things that's ever happened to me. You know, you're in a place where you're forced to learn the language, forced to learn a culture, a society. And I compare it similar to the time zones. With the US and Europe, it's a 6-hour time difference, and culturally it's quite similar. And I think with China and the US, it's a 12-hour time difference for the most part. They don't have daylight savings, so it's either 12 or 13 hours. And I think the cultural and social dynamics are exactly the same. It's exactly opposites. And to live in a society like that, you have to open your mind to the possibility that the way you do things, the way that you live, is not how everybody else in the world lives.
Right.
And it was quite fascinating. And every day I've spent in China, I learned something new, either about myself or about the people around me. And I think that's a fascinating thing.